Welcome everyone to our week 4 webinar for the CMOOC, and it's great to have a few people here this morning to be able to discuss with us. We were looking at with week 4 and legislation and the wider impact, and we've got a really good selection of people here for the webinar. We've got all the way from the UK. We've got Ian Upton.
Hello.
So,
hello, and I'm holding
Ian.
my eyes open as I've been up since the crack of dawn, and it's quite late here.
And Ian's in Coventry, which is pretty much the other side of the world from us. Then we have Stephanie.
Hello, here in New Zealand. Good morning or good evening.
So great to have Stephanie on board. And just a little bit over the ditch in Australia, we've got Kavita.
Hi, all the way from Melbourne.
What's the weather like in Melbourne at the moment?
Well, this very minute it's sunny, so check back in 5 and it might be different. Might be hailing by then.
yeah, that's what Melbourne used to be like. And Ben, we've got Ben all the way from Auckland, so welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
So
glad to be here.
Yeah, so we're looking at week 4, and it's really to do with the section of the portfolio which is called the wider context, and it's really looking at areas of, I guess, law, legislation, policy, and that's either national or international, and maybe it's institutional, but stuff that really impacts on your practice. Okay, Lisa's just trying to get in. I'll just email her the link. So I'll just go into screen sharing and we can have a quick look at that. And just while we're doing that, I'll just send Lisa the link. So how are people going with this section? I mean, it can be a section that people find a little bit tricky to decide, what legislation they're going to talk about. What is it that does impact on your practice? How does that positively impact? Maybe it negatively impacts, maybe it limits what you can do. Different legislation, maybe institutional policies around what types of learning technologies are officially supported, which ones aren't. Maybe there's even policies around technologies that people are not allowed to use, which can be difficult. So, well, Ian, what about you? What have you sort of targeted with your section?
I found this quite interesting because initially you sort of think, sort of legislation and policy, gosh, that sounds as dull as dishwater. And then I started to think about it. And it actually, in my job, academic development in the university, it is an absolute foundation in everything that I do. It informs and directs really everything, literally everything that I do. So in my portfolio, which I've whacked up on the project bank or this section, what I tried to do, because it could have just got too big, was pick 3 things which I felt reflected what I was doing now, but also the breadth of stuff. So the areas I picked on, first one, which is one quite close to my heart, which is copyright. So as a media person, I think, as I put in my portfolio, people have this attitude of let's just Google an image and whack it in and it's okay because it's education. And I think for me as a media person, that is a little difficult, but also I think we're living in an age where certainly at Coventry, a lot of the materials and stuff that are being created are going to end up in these online systems, these online courses, which people are, Coventry is very much getting into at the moment. And my genuine worry is that at some point in the future, one of my lecturing staff who I'm supporting is going to put an image into something that goes into an online course that then gets sold and then gets spotted by one of these big corporations, and it comes howling back. So this idea of sort of introducing copyright and sort of realistic knowledge about it seemed quite important. So I banged on about that quite a bit.
It's been quite a big thing in Europe and obviously the UK as well around the GDPR, the General Data Protection thing, which we don't have in Australia and New Zealand, but that certainly probably have a big impact on that sort of thing around copyright and what you're allowed to share, etc.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got, it's all a bit scary at the moment, because if you walk around our building where I work, one of the departments has actually put posters up, and there's sort of government posters all the way around the building saying things like, secure your data. It's almost like, wolves have ears or whatever. And it's feeling like a throwback to World War II. It's all a bit scary. Anyway.
Well,
Yeah.
I think this has come at a good time, because I'm currently trying to figure out the limits of what I do and whose property that becomes. Because this portfolio sort of rides on the back of what we're doing at work, there's a lot of I have to admit, I don't know very much about the intellectual property laws, copyright laws, perhaps at the institutional level first, then at the state level, national, and finally globally. So that might be where I'll start exploring the limits, and then see where they can be pushed to an extent. So how much of what I make at work is my own property? I assume because it's for work that it isn't entirely, but I have to check on that. So, what are your experiences, all of you, about what you've made, and then following on from there, has there been a way or a method that you've used to be able to carry that with you as you progress in your career?
Yeah, I mean, Kavita, I can answer that. I mean, it's actually very interesting, and so it's not a sales pitch, but if you dig into the project bank, one of the things that I've actually highlighted in there is a resource which explains and supports digital copyright. The bottom line is that as a creator, you own the copyright, full stop. If you've joined a place like a university or something like that, sometimes you'll find in the contract that it will say something like, sort of the work that you do during the work, that you sign the copyright over, but it is yours to sign over. And that's the bottom line, really. It is as simple as that. What you can do for yourself, which I think is which I'd encourage everybody to do, is look at Creative Commons, because it gives you a very sort of strong legal framework for being able to say things like, actually, as I've done with my resources, I'm quite happy for anybody out there to use these resources freely and whatever, with a proper and robust legal license. But what I do say is that if you use that information and create something from it, you have to credit me for what I've done, so you share it alike. And I say non-commercial, so if somebody wants to sell it, they have to come back and ask me independently. In a way, it's quite straightforward, but in another, it's an absolute minefield.
It is.
Yeah.
And I wonder what the incentive is, because there's so much content on the internet. I find myself at times sort of giving up on following that process of attribution. Looking for images online is exhausting. For what I do, I'm certainly not doing as much as the lecturers and teachers that I work for are doing. They're going through so many resources. They're photocopying textbook images, they're Googling images, they're using image banks, photo stock websites. So I wonder what the incentive is. I'm going to chip in there.
I'm going to chip in there, if I may, and give a real warning. And if you want an understanding of actually how dangerous a strategy is, because I mean, okay, many years ago when we were operating just in classrooms, if we photocopied something, nobody was going to know about it. These days we've got digital rights management, and I don't know if anybody there's got an iPhone, that next time you're in a cafe or something like that, and I'm not going to use the real name, otherwise my phone will chip in, but we'll say, hey, sorry, name that tune, and actually your phone will listen, even in a noisy cafe, and with digital rights management is able to actually target and work out the tune and the copyrights and everything like that. So the idea that we can take an image and just use it and nobody will find it is a little bit naive in this day and age. And again, it's down to how valuable that copyright is to somebody. But at the end of the day, you are vulnerable. So unless we start putting these practices in place, at some point, somebody is going to get, the call from Disney or the call from Warner.
Yes, I think just being aware of those issues is definitely a start. And I'm just looking at Ian's contribution to the project bank for this week. And if I go into the project details, One of the things that we added to the project bank was a Creative Commons license. Well, actually,
Yes.
it's always been there. But by default, it assigned the standard basic Creative Commons to everyone's contribution who put something into the project bank. But what we decided to do was to allow everyone who submitted content or a link or description, etc., to the project bank to choose their own Creative Commons. So there's different versions of it, and I can see Ian's chosen the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike 4. So when you're submitting to the project bank, you get the option of choosing what type of Creative Commons do you want to assign to the material that you're you're submitting. So if I just pull up the submit window, you can see down the bottom it says license options, and then you choose the type of Creative Commons, and you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different types there. And I think if you don't choose one, you just get assigned a default one, which is attribution. So yeah, it's about thinking through the issues of who owns what on the internet, and are you willing to share or not? That's a big issue. But I think there's other issues that you can look at as well under the idea of legislation and things around culture. So that's particularly important in New Zealand, for example, because we're basically defined as a bicultural nation. So we have a bicultural partnership between Maori and basically the UK. And so thinking through how does that impact on your practice? How are you integrating those issues into your practice? How does that impact the use of technology, etc.? So that's a big one is culture. And depending on what country you're from, that may or may not have legislation behind it. Certainly does in New Zealand. But there may be institutional policies as well. So, Stephanie and Ben, are there any issues that you thought would be interesting to look at in this section of your portfolios or have come up in your work?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, you go ahead.
Okay, thank you. At IPU, this past year, we didn't have any sort of institutional policy around use of digital technology or any of these tools, because it's really, the infrastructure has not really been built yet, and that's been part of what I've been trying to champion. And so just within the last year, we have created, and it's been passed and approved, a digital learning and teaching policy. And it's very, very general and generic at this point. It was intentionally written that way so that it could allow for whatever future developments may come that way. And looking ahead to next steps and trying to push forward steps in digital learning, whether it's having one LMS we're using at this institution, or in terms of pushing professional development for staff or any other training, it always directs back to that policy. So I think that was the major piece that I was going to probably start with in my portfolio. And I haven't even thought about yet in the wider context of, past this institution or, New Zealand wide, and simply because this institution is very, it's a private institution, and of course, we probably have to be mindful of some of the other things that we've spoken, but that was probably going to be my starting point for that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the institutional policies are obviously something that impacts directly upon your practice. And so when you're writing about that in your portfolio, I guess you sort of would look at how have you approached that and how has that influenced your choice of technologies for teaching and learning? Has that limited what you can do in any way? Or maybe it actually enables what you're doing. So a policy that encourages the use of technology in teaching and learning might actually be an enabler to get people going with it rather than limiting what they can do.
I have to say I'm the author of it with the support of the Digital Learning Working Group. Is that, I think, an important part that, you know, to also say my role in
Yes,
creating
yeah,
that?
definitely, yeah. So you know, that if you're creating these policies or being involved in their development, then that's quite strategic, and so that shows the impact of your practice, and presumably it will also show, you know, the level of reflection and thought you put into that. If you're actually developing these, then hopefully you've thought quite deeply about them. So that would be quite significant, yeah. So what about you, Ben?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I also, you know, have the same problem as Stephanie does. Yeah, we do not have any clear guidelines regarding this in our institution. And the question that I have is, if you're a researcher on a project and you basically do all the data collection, all the analysis, and you produce reports on you know, the data you have collected, and you know, eventually you want to leave the institution to go somewhere else, work somewhere else. The question I have is, who owns the data? And you know, is it your intellectual property or is it the institution? Because the institution has basically funded the work you have been doing. And now you're the researcher on the project, you want to leave. You have done everything basically. So what is your role in the process and how could you protect yourself? I appreciate your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think it probably varies depending on institution to institution. Some will have quite strict, well, you know, laid out, you know, policies around that, particularly larger ones that perhaps have had issues around that, and so they've dealt with that in perhaps an institutional policy. I think generally in most universities, as far as I'm aware, it tends to be a bit of a partnership sort of a model. You know, obviously the university's funded your research through their, you know, paying for your salary, etc. But you know, as Ian was saying, when you're creating something, it's your intellectual property, and so there's kind of like that collaborative aspect to it. Yeah, Ian, Coventry, do you have, you know, strict legislation or policy around taking data?
And I'm absolutely not an expert on this. I mean, I come more from copyright, from the point of view of media, that if I create something, a drawing or a piece of music, then, you know, I can tell you the copyright is mine, unless I've done it under the auspices of the university, where in my contract it says part of my job, you know, part of the contract is that if I do something while I'm being paid for the university, they own that copyright. I know intellectual property is a slightly different thing, and this is where one of the things, if you do look on my portfolio and click on the Creative Commons thing that I've done, we do go into this a little bit, and it's a really complicated area. And the bottom line is the lawyers themselves will tell you that actually it depends on the value of the thing that is in dispute to the person who is disputing it that is going to cause issue or not. So if it's something that people don't care about, then, you know, you probably get away with it. But if it's the Disney Corporation and you're putting up pictures of, you know, so I'm trying to think of a Disney character, Mickey Mouse, then, you know, you're going to put a target on your chest kind of thing. The other thing we've got at Coventry, of course, is and coming back to Tom's point about the partnership, because, you know, it all sounds a bit draconian when I'm talking about it, is that we actually have an IP department, intellectual property department, and they actually encourage you to go and talk with them, and they are legal lawyery kind of people. But again, it is couched very much in the context of partnership, because obviously, you know, if you've created something or you are in that creative space, you are bringing something to the table, and they are then providing a service which protects you, but also, you know, obviously keeps the university itself in a reasonable place too. It's a fascinating area when you dig into it.
Yeah. So presumably most institutions will have thought about those sorts of issues, and most institutions will have some form of research office which is there to support researchers and get funding, but also hopefully, you know, develop policy around that. So I think it really does vary between institutions, but maybe I don't know whether you have a research office there, Ben, that you can actually go and talk to and ask them, what are the guidelines, what are the limits, what can you do? Yeah.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, and any thoughts from you, Lisa, on wider context?
I'm just thinking, the only thing I can think of at the moment is our TELUS reading lists that we use in the library. I mean, they're all checked for legality, but we've also got a research office. I don't think we've got an IP department as such, but I think we've got a research and legal. We've got a legal office. I might go make some inquiries in there and just see, what they cover for IP.
And have you decided what issues or policies or legislation you're going to cover in your?
I want to do digital learning and teaching. See if I can find something in there about that.
Okay.
And look at our great graduates' recent documentation that's come out.
Okay, so that's kind of like institutional policy and where we want to head.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tom, I've got a question, if I may.
Yeah.
I can see the legislation side of this, but when it comes to sort of policy, when I was looking at my portfolio, I sort of grabbed a copy of the Coventry Education Strategy, which is actually, prescriptive is the wrong word, permission giving might be a more correct way of saying it, but it actually defines the kind of teaching and student experience that the institution is hoping that we will deliver. And I have actually reflected on that in my portfolio. But is that a kind of valid thing to do? Which it's less sort of concrete, it's less legal. But it's,
well, I guess there's difference between legislation and policy. I guess policy is pretty much kind of like guidelines on where an institution wants to head, sort of aspirational, whereas legislation is more law and there's legal implications around that. So I think policy tends to be a bit more fluid.
Yeah, but it's a valid thing to explore and reflect on.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, yeah. And the key with any part of your portfolio, of course, is not only providing some evidence of how whatever you're talking about has impacted your practice and your work and perhaps your colleagues and your students, but that reflection component. What does this mean for you? What has been the impact? Or maybe this is the first time you've thought about it, but you think that in the future this would then change your practice and would have impact on perhaps your colleagues or your students as well. So the reflection component's a very big part of your portfolio. Okay, well, it's been great to have everyone chatting with us today. I think I'm just going to share the...
And apologies for last week. I was actually on leave in Melbourne. I don't normally miss these, but it was a 3-hour difference, and I thought I'm not getting up at 6 o'clock for this.
Yes, but Kavita did. But anyway,
I did indeed.
Okay, I'll take that back. I'll take that back.
That's okay. So just thinking about the forum and the project bank. Just encourage people once again to submit to those and share stuff. But also just wanted to have a quick look at the Google map because we are growing that and we're getting more and more views. So we're across 2,600 views now, 2,611, and we've got a good list of people involved there right around the world, which is great. It's great to see having a bit of an international community. So I just wanted to sort of highlight that again, and if you haven't put yourself on the map, then I encourage you to do so. If you have, maybe put a little bit of detail about yourself, a photo, maybe a link to your website, your portfolio, or where you work, something like that. So there's a little bit of info there that people can check out and get a bit more info about you. So that's pretty much us for this week. It's been great to have everyone involved. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us. And
sorry,
Kavita.
the link didn't work the first time.
That's all right. And Stephanie, Ian, and Ben, and we'll hopefully see you all again next week.
Thank
you very much.
Thanks. Good to
See you
see
later.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Talk soon.
Okay. See you.